Welcome to True Crime Murders Sweden. Every case we cover is real. Every story has a victim. And sometimes, the truth is darker than anyone imagined. Stay with us as we uncover today's case.
Okay, so you wanted to deep dive into the Wilma Andersson case.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, these articles and forum discussions you sent are intense.
It is a fascinating case.
Yeah, and it grabs you right from the start, but it's also, so sad.
It's true. The case really captivated people here in Sweden. And even though it's technically solved, there are still so many questions.
Yeah.
And a real sense of unease because we still don't have all the answers.
Right. It's like even though there's been a conviction, there's still this unsettled feeling, I guess, because people just want to know more, what really happened? Why did it happen?
Exactly. It goes beyond just knowing who did it. We want to understand the why, the
Right.
motive,
Yeah.
the psychology behind it all.
Totally. So we're talking about Wilma Andersson. She was 17 years old from Uddevalla, and she disappeared back in November 2019. And we're going to get into all the details, but I think, before we do, it's important to remember that this isn't just some case file.
Right.
This is about a young life that was cut way too short and a family that's been absolutely shattered by grief.
It's crucial to remember that Wilma was a person with hopes and dreams.
Of course.
She had a whole life ahead of her.
Yeah.
And she was active on social media, especially Facebook.
I saw this.
She loved photography and was really close with her sister Emily.
And I read that Wilma and Emily were actually living together at the time because of some complicated family dynamics.
That's right.
And so they were really each other's rocks, especially with everything that was going on with Wilma's boyfriend.
Yes, her boyfriend Tishko Ahmed.
Right.
He was 23 at the time.
Okay.
Seemed charming on the surface.
Right.
But the articles and forum discussions paint a very different picture.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot more to that story
Much
when
more.
it meets the eye.
Yes, he was very controlling and possessive.
One of the forum posts that I read mentioned that a lot of abusers use that charm as a way to manipulate and isolate their victims. Is there any truth to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately a very common pattern. Abusers often use charm to lure their victims in making them feel special and loved.
Right.
But over time, that charm gives way to control and manipulation.
Yeah.
They try to cut the victim off from their support system,
Right.
making them more dependent on the abuser.
Right. And that seems to be what was happening with Wilma.
It does seem that way.
The articles detailed how Tishko put a GPS tracker on her phone. He told her where she could and couldn't go, and even verbally abused her.
And this type of control can be very subtle at first.
Oh, yeah.
A seemingly harmless comment here, a restriction there.
Yeah.
But it escalates over time, chipping away at the victim's self-esteem and independence.
Yeah. It's like a slow burn almost.
It can be.
So Wilma tried to break up with him several times,
Right.
but he just wouldn't let her go.
Sadly, that's a common scenario as well.
It's so scary to think about how abusers can make their victims feel so trapped and powerless.
Yes, this is a very difficult situation to escape.
And her mom, Linda, had a bad feeling about Tishko right from the start, which I think just goes to show you how powerful a mother's intuition can be.
It's amazing how often mothers just know.
It really is.
They have this sixth sense
They do.
when it comes to their children.
It's like they just have a spidey sense about these things.
It really is.
It's incredible. But yeah, it was ultimately Wilma's decision, and I think her act of courage to finally leave that relationship.
Yes, leaving an abusive relationship can be the most dangerous time for a victim
Really?
because the abuser feels like they're losing control,
Oh, yeah.
and that can lead to a dangerous escalation of violence.
Right.
It's just heartbreaking that in Wilma's case, it ended so tragically.
So on November 14, 2019, Wilma went to Tishko's apartment to get her things.
Okay.
And that was the last anyone ever saw her.
Wow.
And it just sparked this massive search.
I can imagine.
Helicopters, search dogs, volunteers. I mean, everyone was just desperately hoping to find her.
Of course.
It was all over the news here in Sweden.
Yes, it was a huge story.
Yeah.
Everyone was following it very closely.
And as the investigation unfolded, Tishko's behavior immediately raised red flags for investigators.
What do you mean?
Well, he claimed that Wilma had simply left.
Okay.
But his story just didn't add up.
I see.
And some people even picked up on this sense of relief in his demeanor,
Oh, wow.
which is pretty chilling if you think about it in the context of a missing person.
Yes, that's a very strange reaction.
Yeah, it's like he wasn't even trying to pretend to be worried.
Right.
And when the police questioned him, they noted how unconcerned he seemed, even smiling at times.
Mm.
I mean, it's just not how someone who genuinely cares about their missing partner would act.
No, it's not.
I mean, do you think that lack of empathy is a common trait in abusers?
It can be. Some abusers are so focused on maintaining control and avoiding consequences
Right.
that they just shut down their emotions entirely.
Wow.
They can't allow themselves to feel empathy
Yeah.
because it would mean confronting the reality of their actions.
Right.
And that's just something they're not willing to do.
So they just kind of like shut off that part of themselves.
Exactly. They compartmentalize their emotions in order to protect themselves.
Wow. That's scary. So the search for Wilma continued, but the investigation just seemed to hit a wall.
Right.
I mean, there was just no sign of her anywhere.
It was a mystery.
But then the police decided to do a second search of Tishko's apartment.
Okay.
And this time they used luminol.
Oh, interesting. Could you tell us a little bit about that technique?
Yeah, so luminol is this chemical that reacts with the iron in blood and causes it to glow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's super useful for forensic investigations, especially when you think someone might have tried to clean up a crime scene.
I see.
Like, even if you can't see blood with the naked eye, luminol can reveal those hidden traces.
So it's like a secret weapon for investigators.
It really is, and that's exactly what happened in Tishko's apartment.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the luminol revealed bloodstains everywhere.
Really?
Yeah, the living room, the hallway, even the bathroom.
Oh, gosh. It just paints this horrifying picture of what might have happened in that apartment.
Yeah, it really does.
So the luminol tests were really critical then.
Oh, no, absolutely.
They showed that a violent struggle had likely taken place,
Right.
despite Tishko's claims that Wilma had just left.
Yeah, I mean, it directly contradicted his story.
It did.
And it was really a major turning point in the investigation.
I can imagine.
But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come.
What was that?
So during that second search, they found Wilma's head concealed in a suitcase in Tishko's closet.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and it was like meticulously wrapped in foil and tape.
Wow, that's chilling.
It really is. And the way that it was concealed, it just points to premeditation,
Right.
like a calculated attempt to hide the crime.
Exactly. It wasn't some spur-of-the-moment act of passion or anything.
No.
It was planned.
It was planned, and to make matters even worse, the rest of Wilma's body was never found.
Oh, wow. So there's still some unanswered questions.
Absolutely.
Like what happened to the rest of her remains?
Right. And in some of those forum discussions you sent, there was a lot of speculation about what might have happened to it.
Yeah, it's natural for people to try and fill in the gaps, especially in a case as horrific as this.
Yeah. And the unknown can be really unsettling.
It can.
But without concrete evidence, it's impossible to say for sure what happened to the rest of her remains.
I guess we may never know the full story.
And it must be just incredibly frustrating for her family and friends
Of course.
to not have that closure.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what they're going through.
But even with the missing body parts, the evidence against Tishko was overwhelming.
It was.
Yet throughout the trial, he maintained his innocence.
Denial is a common defense mechanism,
Yeah.
especially for people who commit such heinous acts.
It's a way for them to protect their ego, I guess.
Right, to avoid facing the true weight of what they've done.
Yeah, but the jury saw right through his act.
They did.
And he was initially sentenced to life in prison.
Wow.
But that was later reduced to 18 years.
Why was the sentence reduced if the evidence was so strong?
Well, sentencing is a complex process,
Right.
and there's often mitigating factors that come into play.
I see.
So the appeals court, they likely considered things like Tishko's age, his lack of prior criminal record, and the specific circumstances of the crime
Right.
when deciding on the final sentence. But make no mistake, even with the reduction, he's still facing a very lengthy prison term.
He is.
But it's interesting to me that even with the conviction, the story didn't really end there.
How so?
Well, the search for Wilma's remains is actually still ongoing.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, her family refuses to give up hope
It's amazing.
of finding her and bringing her home.
That just speaks volumes about the power of love and the human need for closure.
It does.
For Wilma's loved ones, finding her remains would be a way to honor her memory,
Absolutely.
to finally lay her to rest.
Yeah,
It goes beyond just the legal outcome.
it does.
It's about peace of mind
Yeah.
and healing.
Exactly. And while the legal case has concluded, Wilma's story has really had a profound impact on society, particularly here in Sweden.
It has.
Yeah, it feels like Wilma's story, it wasn't just a crime story, it really became a catalyst for change.
I agree.
Like, I remember seeing it everywhere.
It was everywhere on the news, social media.
Yeah.
It really forced people to confront the fact that domestic violence can happen anywhere to anyone.
Right.
And it really highlighted how important it is to be able to spot the warning signs.
Yeah.
Not just for potential victims,
Right.
but for their friends, family, even bystanders.
Yeah, Rick, you said anyone.
Exactly, anyone.
And there was this real push for people to like speak up and intervene if they suspected something was wrong.
Absolutely, silence is often the biggest enabler of abuse.
Right.
So it's crucial to break that silence.
Yeah, and I remember there were all these calls for more funding for domestic violence shelters,
Yes.
better training for law enforcement,
Right.
and just like a bigger emphasis on prevention programs. Did any of that actually happen?
It did, actually.
Wow.
In the wake of Wilma's case, the Swedish government actually implemented a number of new initiatives
Really?
aimed at addressing domestic violence.
That's amazing.
They increased funding for support services.
Great.
They launched these big public awareness campaigns.
Oh, okay.
And they strengthened legal protections for victims.
Wow. So in a way, Wilma's story, tragic as it is, became this turning point for Sweden.
I think so. It wasn't just about seeking justice for one victim.
Right.
It was about creating a safer society for everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it just shows how even from like a terrible tragedy, positive change can emerge.
It's true. Sometimes it takes a tragedy
Yeah.
to really shake things up and force people to take action.
And I guess Wilma's legacy, in a way, lives on in those efforts to prevent future tragedies
I believe so. Her story will continue to inspire change.
and create a world where abuse is simply not tolerated.
Exactly.
It's a powerful reminder that we all have a part to play in ending domestic violence.
We do.
It starts with awareness, with education,
Yes,
with having those difficult conversations,
absolutely.
and with supporting those who are most vulnerable.
That's so important.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking back to Wilma, a young woman whose life was cut way too short.
It's a heartbreaking story.
And it's easy to get caught up in the details of the case, but we can't forget about the human cost.
You're right. We have to remember that behind every case file, there's a real person.
And Wilma's story really underscores the devastating impact of violence.
It does.
It's a call to action for all of us.
It is.
To be more aware, more compassionate, and more committed to creating a world free from violence and abuse.
I completely agree.
It's a heavy topic,
It is.
but an incredibly important one.
Absolutely.
And before we go, let's just take a moment to remember Wilma, her vibrant spirit, her love for photography, and her close bond with her sister.
May her memory be a blessing.
May her memory inspire us to create a future where these kinds of tragedies are a thing of the past.
I hope.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.